clapped in church on Sunday morning. Grandma's hands played a tambourine so well. Grandma's hands used to issue out a warning. She'd say, Billy, don't you run so fast. Might fall on a piece of glass. Might be snakes there in that grass. Grandma's hand. I love that song, Grandma's Hands. It's by Bill Withers. It makes me think of my grandmother, both of my grandmothers, because both of them used to make quilts. When you hear this story, I want you to think in terms of Women's History Month, which is the month of March. This character in the story was an actual woman, and I want you to think about what she did in art to make her very famous. The story is called Sewing Stories, Harriet Power's Journey from Slave to Artist. It is by Barbara Herkert. It is illustrated by Vanessa Brantley Newton. See that baby girl lying on a quilt her mama made? What could she be dreaming of? On a plantation near Athens, Georgia, Harriet's mama worked from rise to set while Harriet slept between the cotton rows. And on each page, they have a piece of cloth in the story that has a fact. Harriet Angeline Powers was born into slavery on October 29, 1837, according to Clark County records. She was one of 5,000 African Americans in bondage in that county alone. I consider this story of the genre historical fiction. They have facts in the story, but what was actually said makes it fiction, but it's based on history. Harriet grew up watching women carding cotton, spinning thread, dyeing and weaving cloth. She learned that wild indigo made blue, hickory bark made brown, and cherry bark made deep red. She studied she studied strong and hard, working her stained fingers. Her heart beat to the booming of the loom. And we have another fact. Slave women were involved in making textiles for the plantation. After they spun cotton into thread, they dyed it with natural coloring and wove it into cloth on a loom. And this is what they were weaving, using for the weaving right here. In the evening, the women gathered together and cut flour sacks and worn cloths into suns and moons and stars, lions, birds, and elephants for appliqued cloth legends of Mother Africa. Harriet listened to their voices hum throughout the quarters late into the night. Some slave women sewed all day for the slaveholder's family. Here's another fact in the book. Only at night could they create for themselves. Applique is a technique where cut designs are stitched onto background fabric. The master frowned on slaves staying up late to sew, but this is when they could sew for themselves, and what they sewed they could keep. Most slaves were forbidden to learn to read and write. Here is another fact in the book on a piece of cloth. They passed on stories verbally and recorded them in cloth. Women sang and sewed by candle or pine knot light in rough log cabins in a section of the plantation called the quarters. Little Harriet placed cotton filling in the quilt. She held the pine knot light high. I won't knot off. No, ma'am. She was part of a sacred tribe. By a crumbling fireplace in the middle of the night, Harriet learned to sew stories. Each piece of fabric means something, and they stuffed it with cotton. Stuffing it with cotton made it warmer. On Sundays and holidays, sometimes the master gave permission for a quilting bee. The women lowered wooden frames from cabin rafters. Long lived Harriet crawled under those big frames and watched needles dart through cloth like silver dragonflies. Oh, I think I heard a simile. That's when you make a comparison using the words like or as. Let me read that again. Harriet crawled under those big frames and watched needles dart through cloth like silver dragonflies. They're comparing the movement of the needles to the movement of dragonflies using the word like. While the mistress of the parent plantation usually supervised the sewing, at a quilting bee, the slave women could be their own artists, making designs with strips of cloth. For a few daylight hours, they might have felt free. I think Miss Muller, the art teacher, would love this book. I must share it with her. When the women finished sewing, making 2 or 3 quilts in just one day, folks gathered for peach pie and ginger cake. Oh, I'm so hungry. Collard greens and barbecue. While they gobbled up the grub, Harriet traced quilted shapes with her finger. Her mama smiled. I think it's time you had a needle of your own. Yes, ma'am. Strong limbed Harriet helped the women sew. Afterwards, she danced at the frolic. That means she danced at she would go to a dance. Here's another fact. Young ladies gathered at the quilting bees as much to dance as to sew. They danced the turkey trot and the Mary Jane. Buckets, pans, and grass reeds were also used as musical instruments. Remember the guy she met at the dance? What was his name? Armstead. She married him. Look at this page. This is how they used to get married in the slave quarters. Harriet and Armstead jumped the broom. They would jump over a broomstick together when Harriet was just 18. Soon Harriet became a mama. She named her pretty baby Amanda. Amanda was the first child. Pray we stay together, she said. When Harriet and Armstead decided to marry in 1855, they had to get permission from the slaveholder. Part of the ceremony was jumping over a broomstick. The Civil War began in 1861. This was a war that would eventually end slavery. The army from the north marched into Athens. The Union soldiers told the slaves, "You're free! Hallelujah! Free at last!" Harriet cried. But trouble didn't end with the war. Oh no. Poverty raced through Georgia. How would Harriet feed her family? Amanda. Oh my goodness, she has 4 more. Alonzo, Nancy, Lizzie, and baby Marshall. 5 hungry faces, 10 bare feet. Show me the way, Harriet prayed. The Emancipation Proclamation declared the slaves free on New Year's Day, 1863, but it could not be enforced in areas still under rebellion. In Georgia, slaves were not freed until Union General Sherman's army invaded in 1864. Slaves in Athens were most likely emancipated sometime after the fall of Atlanta in September 1864. This book is full of history, full of history. Harriet took up her needle, turning snips of calico and an old pair of dungarees into cloth stories that warmed her children and lifted her from hard times for a while. You gotta take what you've been given and make something out of it, she said. Look at the quilts she's making. And she's gonna use some of the quilts and some of her sewing skills to make money, to get by. Another fact, in addition to making quilts, Harriet may have earned extra money by sewing clothes. Armstead earned very little as a farmhand. Harriet saved every extra nickel. The family bought a little farm, a horse, a plow, and some seed. Now plates of catfish steamed on the table. Mmm, that sounds so good. I can almost smell that catfish. Fat vegetables ripened on the vine. The children grew like the cotton Armstead planted. I think I heard another simile. The children grew like the cotton Armstead planted. They are comparing the children growing up like cotton growing from the ground, the plant. Cotton mills popped up all over Georgia, and folks celebrated good times. Here's another fact. Sometime in the 1880s, Harriet and Armstead bought 4 acres near Sandy Creek outside of Atlanta. The family fished and grew vegetables and profitable cotton. Cotton mills purchased cotton from local farmers like Armstead. Athens announced its own party, the Cotton Fair. Folks were abuzz about the craft exhibit. Who would win best in the show? I reckon the good Lord gave me a skill, Harriet said. She snipped calico as pink as watermelon. Oh, that's another simile. This time they used the word as. She snipped calico as pink as watermelon. Remember, similes use comparison using either the words like or as. She cut strips of cloth as green as key limes. That's another one. Harriet sold stories of Cain and Abel, Jacob and Jesus too. Familiar stories that form pictures in her mind. She stitched Bible folks and scenes with polka dotted camels, elephants, and ostriches lived together in a fabric land. I had a hard time getting that out. And there are more facts written in the story. Boys and girls, you must read the story so you can learn more facts in history. Folks at the cotton fair gathered around Harriet's quilt. A young woman, Jenny Smith, offered to buy it. How could Harriet part with a piece of her heart? No, ma'am, not for any price. She couldn't sell it then. She didn't need the money at this time. Remember, earlier she needed money, so she had to sell her quilts. Dark days came a knocking when the price of cotton fell. Harriet sent word. Would Miss Smith still like the quilt? Oh, yes. Harriet climbed into an ox cart, and as Armstead drove into town, she cradled that quilt like a child. That's another simile. Harriet told Miss Smith, you can have it for $10. $10 back then was a lot of money. I only have 5 to give, Miss Smith replied. I reckon that'll do, owing to the hardness of the times. The story's written in dialect, the way people used to speak. Then Harriet explained each story sewn within the squares, like the lyrics of a song spun into cloth. She climbed back in that ox cart, and as Armstead drove away, her lap felt as empty as her heart. That's because she had to sell this quilt. It was very meaningful to her. It had many stories in this quilt. Now folks were talking. Could Harriet make another story quilt? Oh, yes. She pieced together Bible stories and tales of real events in the sky. A meteor shower that really happened. Bright lights burning in the night. It was snowing fire, Harriet said. One a day called Friday, the sky grew dark as midnight, and all the cows and roosters went to bed. This really happened in history, and this is part of science when a meteor came. Harriet delivered the quilt to some ladies in Atlanta, slipping their dollar bills into her apron pocket. Her heart was heavy. Another beloved quilt sold away. Still, it pleased her to hear the women's praise. Harriet never had much money. She didn't own much property. It was a struggle to get by. Her cloth stories lifted her to another world where suns and moons, animals and angels danced together across a fabric sky. One day I shall reach heaven, and one day I shall fly. She used her quilting skills and her sewing skills to make clothes. And that is the end of the story, but I do want to read the author's note. Harriet Powers lived most of her life in poverty. Today, her story quilts are priceless treasures. The first story quilt, the Bible quilt, resides at the National Museum of American History, part of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. If you go to Washington, D.C., you must go to the Smithsonian and see her quilt. The second pictorial quilt resides at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. No other quilts by Harriet are known to exist, although recent scholarship indicates she made at least five. So Harriet became a well known artist. She was poor while she lived, but her quilts were worth quite a lot of money, and you can find them at the Smithsonian. Here is a picture of Harriet, what she actually looked like compared to the illustrator's version of how she looked. Boys and girls, please check out the book Sewing Stories. You can find it in our library. It's by Barbara Herkert. Remember, this is Women's History Month. March is Women's History Month. And she is an important woman in American history. I want to share one last thing. A friend of mine from college told me she made a quilt. I said, I must share this with the children at the school. I have not opened it till now. Look, look how she wrapped it. And she made it with her own hands. We went to college together. I am going to open it so you can see it. Oh, this is cellophane wrap. She wrapped it in cellophane wrap. Her name is Deborah White. Look at the beautiful colors. I love this quilt. I love this quilt. I'm getting it out of the plastic. Oh, it is pink. It is pink and it has green. It has leopard spots. Look at my beautiful quilt. I will have this quilt forever. I will always have this quilt. I love this pink and green quilt. It will always make me remember my days back at Hampton University, and it will remind me of my friend Deborah White, who made this with her own hands. I love it. It is simply gorgeous. I hope you enjoyed the story, boys and girls.